Welcome to Off the Page, the show where we talk with Colorado authors to get the story behind the story. I'm Stacy McKenzie, a librarian here at Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library in Broomfield, and today I've got a wonderful author on the show, Dan Jorgensen, with his book, And the Wind Whispered. Dan, nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So glad we could have you on the show today.
Yeah, I'm glad you could too. Thanks.
Dan, the first thing I usually like to ask authors are, do you write full-time or do you have another career?
Well, I am a full-time writer, but I'm not a full-time author.
Okay.
I was trained as a writer, as a journalist, and then worked in writing both in journalism and public relations for over a 40-year period. But interspersed among that was the opportunity to become a creative writer as well. And so every few years I've been able to produce a book creatively, and that's what I would say would be my author title in that part of it.
Oh, that's a great answer too. I like the way you phrased that. Do you have any writing influences that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, I had two really. My mother was a great influence for me because she was so encouraging of me and my brothers reading all the time. Read. She constantly put books in our hands as kids from very early ages. I can remember learning to read when I was 5 and beyond that. And then after I got into high school, I had an English teacher who was unbelievably inspiring for me. Her name was Clarkie Hoover, and she was the first person to really come up to me and say, you know, Dan, you should be a writer someday because your writing is really interesting, it's good, it's creative, and you should follow that and do something with it. And she put books into my hands again, really books beyond the age that I was, 16 or 17. She was giving me books that college students or beyond would be reading and say, read this, someday you can write like this.
How encouraging.
It was amazing.
How marvelous.
Yeah. I still send her thank you notes from time to time.
Oh, I bet you she appreciates that so much.
I hope so.
Wonderful.
I hope she doesn't say, oh, that man keeps stalking me.
I am positive she doesn't. That's marvelous. Let's talk about the book, And the Wind Whispered.
Yes.
Now, your book is a little bit of fact, a little bit of fiction. Tell me about how those work together.
Well, it's historical fiction.
Okay.
So it's based on factual things that occurred in the early 1890s in the southern Black Hills of South Dakota. Specifically, it's set around the Hot Springs, Buffalo Gap, and Wind Cave area. This was an area that was kind of a tourism mecca in the early 1890s. And developing into one of the places to go to for people from back east or even from out west in California were coming back to this area. And a lot of things were really happening at that time. And so those were the factual things. And then I put together that with some things that I made up and created, as they say, a little creative license, and found some characters that were real to mix with characters that I imagined, and the two of them together created this book.
And that's what makes it such a good read, that you put your twist on it. And you really did add some really interesting characters.
Yeah.
You didn't make them all up. Some of them are famous people.
Well, yeah. My most famous one, I think, is Nellie Bly. She's the very amazing, and that was her nickname at the time, Amazing Nellie Bly, reporter who did investigative journalism in a way that hadn't been done before. She worked for Joseph Pulitzer in New York City. And she actually traveled to this area in the early 1890s, in 1894, the year that I have set, and at the time that I have set, because she wanted to get away, kind of go to a spa, and Hot Springs, after all, was a spa, and relax and kind of be incognito and kind of rejuvenate herself. And I make her part of this story. Others are Bat Masterson, the famous lawman, Theodore Roosevelt, our president, who is now enshrined up in the Black Hills on Mount Rushmore, of course. And I even bring in Charles Rushmore for a little cameo appearance for who they named the mountain. So,
how did you come up with these characters?
Well, when I worked at the Hot Springs Star, I was a writer and editor there, and in the 1970s and early 80s. And I found in the archives stories about some of these very famous people that came there, including Buffalo Bill and Annie Oakley. I put them in there too. And I thought, jeepers, all these people were coming here at the same time. And they must have had a chance to meet and interact with one another. why not make that the basis of my story? And then out of that, I started to think, okay, what happens if they would have come here being threatened by an outlaw gang? And there was a big one that was threatening everyone at that time. And also, what if there's a murder mystery involved as well, and they all have to get involved in that? And that was how I developed the story.
All of that just combined is all great elements of a good story. My favorite part is that they're looking for something.
Oh, they are.
And I want to hear about how you came up with that as part of your edge to your story.
Well, this is another real story. Around the time that Hot Springs was founded, in the late 1870s and early 80s, there was a lot of gold being shipped out of the Home State Gold Mine in the northern Black Hills. And lots of gold trains were going through, but they've had this gold wagon that had an incredible amount of gold, 700 pounds of gold bars, and then a lot of smaller coins and jewels and things like that. And it was robbed by a gang called the Lame Johnny Gang. This is a real gang. And the Lame Johnny Gang not only broke in and stole all the gold, but they took it with them and they buried it out in the southern Black Hills, planning to come back and get it later.
And this is true.
This is all true. And they kept the coins and they kept some of the jewels, and that's how they knew that these were the gang members, because they were able to capture all but one of them. And the 4 that they captured were either hung or were shot and killed or wounded and died of their wounds. The one they never found, the one person they never found. But the other 4 said that the gold was still up there in this area of the Black Hills, an area called Red Canyon. And Red Canyon is near where I have a major part of the story taking place. And in the early 1900s, this rancher's wife came out looking for some missing cattle and found an old cave, abandoned cave that no one had really found before. She went in there, and here were all kinds of things that looked as if an outlaw gang may have been living in there, including some empty strong boxes that said Home State Mine on them. They were empty. So they thought, all right, where's the gold?
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of friends in that area who are from the Dakota tribe on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is right nearby. And their stories out of their ancestry says that the Native Americans found the gold in this cave, and they took it and put it back in the earth because gold, yellow, is a sacred color to the Native American tribes. And they thought, it's terrible that this gold was taken from our sacred Black Hills. We're going to put it back. And so they said they buried it there in that Red Canyon area. Now, no one's ever found it. It's still there somewhere.
Oh my goodness, I got chills a little bit. That's exciting. I've got to go.
700 pounds of gold is worth about $15 million if you can find it.
Goodness.
You could retire.
Wow, I could finally retire.
I could retire.
That would be wonderful. That is fabulous. So you have another element of your story that I found fascinating. We've got our famous characters, and we've got our gold, and we've got our murder mystery, but you've got another kind of group of characters that factor in that are a whole different sort of genre. Tell me about them.
Well, I've got a bunch of teenagers in my book, young people who play a very important part in this book, and all but there are 7 of them who are under the age of 20, and 2 of them I made up, but the other 5 were real people. And the reason I chose to have teenagers in this story is about the vibrancy of the time, the area, the time, the era. A lot of the people who really had an impact on how that area was settled and how things were developed and who was doing what or whatever were teenagers or young people under age 25. You know, people over age 25 could be considered to be over the hill almost. Nellie Bly in the book is 30, and she's feeling like, oh, my life is passing me by. I'm 30. But these young people had a very important part to play, and I found these 2 women, Laura and Minnie Thompson, who were real young reporters at the time. Their father owned the Buffalo Gap newspaper, and Laura, the older one, went to work for the Hot Springs Star, which is the paper I worked for 80 years later. But so Laura worked there and wrote many important stories at the time. about women doing interesting and impressive things. And Minnie, her sister, became equally involved in all of the area things and wrote about things. So those were two of my key characters. A young Native American boy named Al Tucrow plays a big part in this. The young Will Rogers. Will Rogers, the famous person from the early 1900s, at that time in the 1890s was a 15-year-old boy who came to the Black Hills to bring a load of horses up there, and then ended up taking a cattle drive back to Oklahoma Territory where he lived. But that was kind of the start of him being involved in things and becoming a household name across America. By the time he died in the 1930s, he was probably the most well-known person in the United States.
Yes,
Yeah.
everybody should.
But he was one of those, and there were others. Lots of young people. I have a young deputy sheriff who's under 20, and all these people that are involved in making things happen are young people. So
The research you must have done for this. How did you go about making sure you got, what you needed to get correct?
well, I was finding all these names as I was working for the Star and looking in the archives. There, I did find a lot of names of people, and I thought, I've got to learn more about this character or this person. I want to bring that person into the book. And so I just spent the time, I took a lot of time very meticulously researching, going through old books from the area, books of history that I found, books about the Black Hills, and general things about the outlaw gangs that roamed the area, and making sure that I was being very true not only to the era but to the people that I was putting in that era.
I think you were.
I think so too.
Yes, all that time and energy. With all of this going on in the book, and famous historical figures, and murder mystery, and a treasure hunt, and even some young adults,
Yeah.
who would you define as the best audience for your book?
Yeah, that one of the reviewers that took a look at this first said she found it hard to place this book into any particular box. She said, it's a historical fiction piece, it's an adventure story, and it's a murder mystery, and she said, I think it applies to all of those audiences, maybe even young adult, although there is some, depends on how the language part of it, there's a little bit of language because I do have outlaw gangs after all, and they tended not to say, "Oh shucks."
Yeah, yeah.
But otherwise, I think that I think a lot of young adults would like this book very much, and especially with the characters, they can relate to them, their age. But I think older readers, even people in their 80s and 90s, would enjoy this book because it reaches into things that they like to read about too.
Right.
And then the murder mystery crowd, I think, would love it. There's a definite mystery to solve and resolve, and they work together. People who like Theodore Roosevelt and his part that he played in the settling of the West, and Seth Bullock, I have for the famous sheriff from Deadwood, comes into play and is part of the book. So all these people play an important part in it, and I think people would like that story.
I really did see something for everybody in the book. So I don't know how you did that.
Cross-genre.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Now, perhaps it is so good because it took you a little while to write the book.
It did take me a while. I started really researching this book back in the late 70s and early 80s when I lived there, but over the years I just gathered bits and pieces and kept exploring. I had a folder about this thick, that I kept putting things in. My wife, Susan, helped me a lot with that. She was constantly on the lookout for things. We went back to the area a lot to walk the grounds and look at the special locations that we wanted to include in it, and make sure we were being true to the landscape and all that too. And then I finally really got serious about writing it in early 2009. In 2008, late in the year, I had a bad heart problem and ended up with a triple bypass operation. And the doctor said, you easily could have died. And so I came home and I said, if I'm ever going to write this book, now is the time. I've got to get going on it. That's what I call the writer's moment, I guess.
Yes.
and so I started writing, and started really putting it together and developing the story and moving it along and weaving the characters together and seeing how they would interact with each other. And so the serious final part of the writing was the last 2 years. But up till that, it was getting all the little things together and deciding how each chapter was going to be developed and move the story along. So.
And all the best writers say the writing is the easy part, it's the next part. That is the hard part. What happens after you write it, it's not done, right?
Of course not. Yeah, the first draft is really that. It's a first draft. And even as you're writing it along, the way I tend to write a book is to write it, and then each day before I start writing again, to look at what I wrote the day before and make sure that it still makes sense. And sometimes you reach little walls where your characters just aren't doing what you want them to do, and that may mean that you've got them going in the wrong direction, and you need to think about, is there something I needed to do back earlier in the book, and go back and look at that and maybe change something so that what happens in chapter 3 really does make sense in chapter 30. So otherwise, but there's a lot of that rewrite, and the version that you see here is probably the 5th iteration of this book. By the time it went through, got edited, re-edited, final way that it's put together, and then it goes to the publisher, and the publisher has a reading and editing team too, and they go through it very meticulously to make sure that the history is correct and the way that it reads sounds correct, and everything makes sense. So the book you get is a finely polished piece, I guess.
It does. It looks very nice.
It does look nice.
Tell me about your publisher. How was it working with them?
Well, it's great. This is the best publisher. This is my 3rd publisher that I've worked with over the years. Really the best one. It's located in Denver, Bygone Era Books, run by Daniel Willis, and he has done an amazing job in taking what I gave and going through, making a few suggestions here and there, or his reading crew said, maybe you should do this, or maybe think about changing this, and never demanding, just suggesting. But all the suggestions I found to be just perfect, and the book then has come out, and I love it.
Yes.
And they developed all the layout, the design. Everything was done by Bygone Era Books.
Wonderful.
And it's right here in Denver, so it's great.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Any aspiring authors might want to.
They should look them up on the website, because they've got a great array of books coming out, and I think have already been released, and a lot more coming. So they're on a roll. I think they're going to be making a splash in the publishing world. Well,
and congratulations on it, Dan. It really does look lovely,
oh,
and it is really a great book.
Thank you.
Now, the meat of the whole interview I've been trying to get to. What I really want to know is, Dan, did you go hunting for that treasure?
We didn't try to find the treasure, but what we did try to find was some of the things that people said led to the treasure.
Okay.
This canyon, we wanted to make sure, does this canyon really exist? We found it. There's a tree. This one head of this outlaw gang was supposedly hanged from this tree, a triple 3-trunk cottonwood tree that at the time would have been quite huge. And we thought, if this tree is still around, and cottonwoods can grow to be hundreds of years old. Right. So we had a general idea of where this was located based on things we had found, and we found the tree. Yeah, we did. And then we were taking pictures of it, and then later on I was being interviewed there by a television station about the book. And a local rancher pulled up, and he said, "Why are you shooting film by the Lame Johnny tree?" And that Lame Johnny was the gang that. And I said, "Well, that we were under the understanding that this might have been the tree that he was hanged from when he was captured." And the rancher said, "Absolutely, that's the one."
That's a treasure right there, if
it
you
was.
ask me.
But then he said, "Do you know where the treasure is?"
Oh, yeah.
And we had no clue.
Do you?
Yeah, do you?
People
have been looking for 100 years, and they haven't found it yet, so it's still there. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's exciting, and the book is exciting, and we won't give away how it ends or if they find the treasure or not. But, Dan, I hope we're going to get another treasure from you in the form of another book. Do you have another project you're working on?
Well, I am working on another book, and I like the Black Hills as a setting.
Okay.
This is the first book I've set there, even though I have other books set in South Dakota. It's my home where I originally grew up and everything, and I was a ranch farm kid back there, and you know, used to ride horses to the one-room country school I went to and all that, and so you know, I love that area, and I know there's a lot more to write about from there. And one of the key things I think is set around the time that Mount Rushmore was started. And I think there's a murder mystery and an adventure to be set there too. So that's my next project, and I'm already working on it.
That is a fascinating location, something about that.
And it'd probably only take me 6 or 7 years this time.
Well, yeah, you better get started.
I'm started.
Okay, good.
But I'm going to pay as much attention to that as I have to this, and I think that's what, you know, makes a good book. You don't have to just pound them out, as long as the ones you do put out there are accurate and interesting and exciting.
Dan, writing in this part of the country, do you have a connection to that, or what made you say this sounds like a great place to write about?
Well, I do. I grew up as a farm ranch kid in South Dakota. I was raised on a ranch, really, that had some farm ground as well, but out in the middle of nowhere, kind of, near not too far from the Rosebud Reservation, and there's an area called Spring Valley. And we had a lot of opportunities to, you know, be and see the Old West, be in it and see it the way it was. And I attended a one-room country school through the first 8 grades, and well, I was the only kid in my class, actually. So it was a fairly good-sized school for a school that was out there like that, about 23 students, I remember. But I was the only one in my class all those years, and so I was always #1 in my class. So
yeah, good for you. Excellent.
But the teacher used to remind me I was also last, so not to let it go to my head. Yeah, but that was kind of the reason I've loved having South Dakota as a place to write about, because I grew up there and I lived there. I started my writing career there. I worked for a newspaper in Sioux Falls, and then I worked for these newspapers out in the Black Hills, both the Hot Springs Star and the Rapid City Journal, and so I had the opportunity to really get to know, I know the state, and I got to know the areas even better with my journalism there.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So yeah, a deep connection there.
A deep connection, yeah. And my wife's from there too, so.
Oh, well, there you go. It all makes sense now. What brought you to Colorado?
Well, I came out here first in the 70s to work at Colorado State University, where I also did some study in creative writing. That's where I started my creative writing. I wrote my first book while I was there, called Killer Blizzard. But again, that was a book set in South Dakota. but it was written while I was in Colorado, and I loved Colorado, but I had this opportunity to go up and do the editorship, the writing up in the Black Hills, and so we went to do that. And then my daughter and her family moved out here about 7 years ago, and they lived in Broomfield and then moved to Longmont. But we decided we wanted to be closer to them as we got near our own retirement, and so we chose to move to Broomfield, and we've been here now for a couple of years.
Wonderful. Glad to have you.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned one of your previous books.
Yes.
Tell me about, you've got 2 other books?
I have 5 other books, actually.
5 other books.
Yeah, I've written 3 books for the teen tween group, sports novels actually, and both, again, focused mostly on girls' sports. One's basketball, one's softball, and one's soccer. And they're novels, though they're not, but they've got a lot of, again, realism in them to real life. Kids who are in those sports will say, yeah, that's my team, I think.
Terrific.
Yeah, and then I wrote a book of essays called Jargon the Book, which came out maybe about 10 years ago. And then I also shared writing with a man named Roger Brandt, and we did a book on hiking trails for families in South Dakota. And so
Great.
that's the books I've written. I also have written for an anthology called A Farm Country Christmas, and includes stories by people like Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I'm in there too. So.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
But so this is really a departure from what you've done before.
It is. It's my first really venture into historical fiction, but it's something like I said, I've been interested in for many, many years, and been gathering research on for many, many years. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. But my earlier books were adventure or action type of things, and so I thought, well, I'll weave those elements in as well.
So I have to ask you, like choosing your favorite child, which genre do you think you might stick with, or do you prefer?
I prefer this one. I really do like the way this book has come out, and I like the way I guess that I've been able to do it, and to blend those elements together. It's something that I don't think a lot of writers do. They either get in one track or another, and I said, why not roll them together? And so maybe I'm creating a whole new genre here. I just don't know what it is yet.
It seems like all of that experience has just led you to this. That's fabulous to finally feel something you really like.
It's good, yeah. The other books have done well, and I enjoyed writing them, but I really have loved writing this book and putting it together and seeing how it came out.
Wonderful. Dan, thank you so much for sharing this wonderful book with us. I really appreciate you coming and visiting with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Oh, we appreciate you.
Okay.
I'd like to thank my author today, Dan Jorgensen, for being on the show, and appreciated him talking about his book, And the Wind Whispered. Check your local library for the books talked about on today's show, and join us for more next time on Off the Page.